A Christmas Too Many has some okay moments in it, but in general, it's not a good film. This was released in 2007, is written and directed by Stephen Wallis, and the cast in general is pretty good. The acting across the board is good. Some of the characters, though, are really unlikable, but then there would be times when I think, okay, my opinion's slightly changing about this character, they're becoming likable again, and then the tables would turn again and I'd stop liking them. I don't think there's any character I hated, but there were times where I didn't like pretty much every character. There were some characters where I felt nothing. I didn't really care for them, and I guess that's better than hating them. But the two that I thought worked really well were the characters of Grandma and Grandpa, played by Ruta Lee and Mickey Rooney. Both gave great performances, particularly Ruta Lee. Had she not been in it, granted, the film wouldn't have worked without the character, and I'll talk about the character in a moment, but had that character not been in it or had that performance not been very good, I don't know if I would have made it to the end of the film. However, I did make it to the end of the film, and the most frustrating thing is not that it wasn't good, but that every now and then it felt like it was turning a corner, and that it was getting better, and that the characters who were annoying me were actually becoming tolerable. And every time I felt like it was going in a better direction, something ridiculous would happen, or a character would have an outburst that I didn't really care for, and it just made it really, really difficult to watch. The narrative absolutely could have lended itself to a good story because we have this grandmother who was a successful actor, as we come to find out, and she's invited her family for Christmas dinner. It's quite a large family because obviously we have her children who are now grown up with their own children, and there are a lot of different characters, and they have a kind of dysfunctional family dynamic. And there are many films like that, and a lot of them work really well. But in this one, it just felt a little bit too chaotic. I struggled to believe that there was a reason for all of these people to be under the same roof. And it just didn't work for me at all. It felt like we were looking at separate stories, and not in a good way. Again, there are films that can have different perspectives, characters that are completely different, but all coming together for the same purpose. The purpose here being the dinner, but it just doesn't work. Whenever pretty much any of the characters are together, there's no chemistry between them, but there's no real animosity. There's just nothing. There are no emotions. There's nothing coming across. And I don't necessarily think that's because of the acting. It's just the way the characters are written, the way the stories are written, the situations that the characters find themselves in. The only few exceptions are scenes between the grandmother, her daughter, and her adult daughter. I apologise for not remembering their names. There are a lot of characters in this one, and needless to say, I was more focused on how terrible things were going than I was trying to retain the names. But that kind of mother-daughter-grandmother relationship, when they briefly touched upon it, I thought that could have been quite moving, and if they'd maybe focused on that a bit more, it could have been an interesting angle. Something ridiculous happens with the grandmother, and I will say a tiny part of me was curious to find out what would happen with that part of the narrative. I can't really, well, I mean, I probably could spoil it because I don't really recommend the film, but just in case you do want to watch it, I won't spoil it, but you'll know exactly what I mean when I talk about this. And I thought it was just ridiculous, and it's almost like they were saying, we don't have a cleverly written script, we don't have a well written or well structured narrative, so we'll just do this with the grandmother instead, and it'll be a little bit quirky and a little bit weird and I guess unexpected, which, to its credit, the element of surprise is often a good tactic to go with, especially if the rest of the film isn't doing very well. However, even the way that that kind of developed, I just found it was really boring. It did give us some really great performances from Ruta Lee, but that really is the only good thing about that decision. It's not a good film. It's not a particularly festive film either. Actually, the other thing that I did like, another character that I liked, was Gary Coleman. He played, well, the character's called Pizza Guy on IMDb, and I thought he came in at the right time. The pacing there was good. The pacing to bring in the character was very effective. I will say the pacing in the whole film isn't too bad. It's kind of slowly bringing in characters a little bit more, as we're gearing towards this dinner, and I think the dinner happened at a good point in the film as well. I am clutching at straws, but I do think it's always worth praising a film, however otherwise bad it may be, for the things that they got right. And I thought the pacing was very good. It's just a shame that the things that were happening were not that interesting. But yeah, other than that, other than a few performances, the narrative isn't very good. It's not very festive. And I definitely didn't find it funny. So I wouldn't recommend it unless perhaps, there's somebody in it whose career you want to watch. My plan is to one day watch everything Mickey Rooney's done, so I would have come to this film eventually anyway. I'm glad I've kind of got it over and done with now. It's not great, and I did read some reviews after watching it, because I'm always very nervous of giving negative reviews, especially if I'm the only person who feels that way. I would never lie about how I feel, but I would feel a little bit hesitant if I read everybody loved it and I hated it. I would have to question why I was the only person who didn't like it. But it seems to be generally that it hasn't done very well. I don't recommend it unless there's a specific reason why you want to watch it. Personally, I didn't mind watching the performances from Ruta Lee and Mickey Rooney and Gary Coleman. As I said, nobody else's performance was bad, but the characters were either really boring or generally really unlikable. And the actual narrative itself wasn't very interesting. So, unfortunately, as much as I wanted to like this, A Christmas Too Many is not a good film.